Mila Harrington had promised herself she would hate that man until her last breath. Dylan Whitmore was everything she despised. Cold, calculating, a stranger forced upon her like a sentence. The marriage was a betrayal. The honeymoon, a farce. But then he touched her, not with possession but with reverence. And when his lips stole the kiss she didn't want to give, something inside her broke, or awakened. Now caught between hatred and desire, Mila faces the most dangerous question. What if surrendering was the only real freedom? If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and become a member to get early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt it was really worth listening to, also click the Super Thanks button. Your gesture makes all the difference and helps us continue bringing stories that move you. The scent of white lilies filled St. Augustine Cathedral with a suffocating sweetness, mingling with the ancient smell of polished wood and burning candles. Outside, an October sky hung heavy with clouds that threatened rain, but hesitated, as if even nature doubted witnessing what was about to happen. Inside, beneath vaulted ceilings that had seen countless unions, Mila Harrington stood at the end of a seemingly endless aisle, her fingers trembling around a bouquet of ivory roses she hadn't chosen. The organ began its procession, a sound that should have filled her with joy, but instead rang out like a funeral march. Each note reverberated through her chest, matching the anxious rhythm of her heart. Through the century-old lace veil obscuring her vision, she could see blurred figures rising from the pews. Her father's business associates, the Whitmore family elders, high society members who had come not to celebrate love, but to witness a corporate merger. Mila's white silk dress, imported from Milan and selected by her father's assistant, felt like armor. Beautiful, but imprisoning. The corset underneath squeezed her ribs with every breath, a physical reminder of how tightly her life had been bound by others' expectations. The dress cost more than most people earned in a year, but she would have traded it for a single moment of freedom. Her father stood at her side, his grip on her arm firm and unyielding. Richard Harrington had built an empire in pharmaceutical manufacturing, but had failed spectacularly at building a relationship with his daughter. To him, Mila had always been an investment, raised in private schools, instructed in languages and etiquette, molded to be the perfect wife for a powerful man. Her dreams of painting, of opening a small gallery somewhere by the sea, had been dismissed as charming hobbies that would pass once she understood her true purpose. "Smile," her father whispered through clenched teeth as they began to walk. "You're representing our family name." Mila wanted to scream that she'd never asked to represent anything, but years of conditioning kept her silent, her face a porcelain mask of composure. She'd learned early that rebellion came with consequences, her art supplies confiscated, her movements restricted, her very identity slowly erased. At the altar stood Dylan Whitmore, and even through the veil, Mila could see he was devastatingly handsome, in a way that irritated her. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore a tailored charcoal suit, his dark hair styled with calculated casualness. But it was his eyes, a piercing gray that seemed to see through everything, that made her breath catch, despite her determination to remain unaffected. Dylan watched her approach with an expression that revealed nothing. At 32, he had transformed Whitmore Vineyards into one of North America's most prestigious wine empires, expanding his family's century-old legacy with ruthless efficiency. He'd dated models and heiresses, attended galas in Milan and charity events in Monaco, but had never allowed anyone close enough to threaten his carefully constructed control. This marriage was strategic. His grandmother, the matriarch who held the controlling shares of the company, had issued an ultimatum: marry within a year or watch the company be sold to corporate investors. Family legacy above all. That was the Whitmore way. When Richard Harrington approached him with his proposal, offering both a substantial investment and a suitable bride, Dylan viewed it like any other business deal, with cold calculation and no room for sentimentality. Yet as Mila drew closer, something unexpected flickered in his chest, an awareness he immediately tried to suppress. The ceremony began with traditional words that felt anything but sacred. The priest spoke of love and commitment, of two souls becoming one, but Mila heard only the emptiness of each phrase. When asked if she took Dylan as her husband, she paused, just for a heartbeat, considering what would happen if she said no. Would her father disown her? Would she finally be free, or would she find herself more trapped than ever? "I do," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. Dylan's response was firmer, more controlled. "I do." The moment came when Dylan needed to lift her veil. He stepped closer, and Myla caught the subtle scent of his cologne, sandalwood and something darker, more complex. His hands, she noticed, were elegant but strong, the hands of someone who worked with both soil and spreadsheets. When his fingers touched the delicate lace brushing her temple, an unexpected current of electricity shot through her body. She shuddered, not from fear, but from the unsettling awareness of his proximity. Dylan's movements were careful, almost reverent, as he slowly revealed her face. Their eyes met for the first time without barriers. Dylan had seen photographs, of course. His grandmother had insisted on a complete dossier, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of Myla Harrington. Her beauty wasn't the manufactured perfection he was used to in his social circles. It was something more dangerous, authentic. High cheekbones, framed eyes the color of aged whiskey, flecked with gold and burning with barely contained fury. Her full lips were pressed into a line of defiance, and a few escaped strands of chestnut hair curled against her neck. She was breathtaking, and she absolutely hated him. Myla, in turn, found herself momentarily disarmed. She'd expected someone cold and corporate, perhaps with the soft edges of privilege. Instead, Dylan's face was all sharp angles and intensity, a strong jaw, lips that suggested both cruelty and sensuality, and those grey eyes that seemed to pierce through her carefully built walls. There was something almost predatory about him, but also something wounded, hidden in the depths. "You may kiss the bride," the priest announced. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Dylan's gaze dropped to her lips, and Myla's pulse quickened despite herself. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away, but she refused to show weakness. When his lips touched hers, it was brief and chaste, the kiss of strangers, fulfilling an obligation. But even that simple contact sent heat spreading through her body, and she hated herself for the traitorous response. The reception was a blur of false congratulations and champagne she didn't drink. Myla smiled until her face hurt, danced with Dylan in front of cameras with mechanical precision, and cut a 5-tiered cake she had no desire to taste. Through it all, Dylan remained at her side, attentive in a way that felt more like surveillance than affection. As guests toasted to their happiness, Myla caught her father's satisfied expression from across the ballroom. He'd finally done it, secured his legacy through her sacrifice. The realization settled over her like ice water. This was her life now. Bound to a man she didn't know, trapped in a marriage built on contracts and corporate interests. When Dylan's hand found the small of her back, guiding her toward another well-wisher, she didn't pull away. But she made a silent vow. She would never forgive him for being part of this. Never forgive him for accepting a loveless marriage. Never forgive him for being exactly what her father wanted. Dylan felt her tension beneath his palm and understood it completely. He didn't want her forgiveness, didn't want her love. He wanted only what he'd always wanted, control over his own destiny. But as the evening wore on, and he caught glimpses of pain flickering behind Myla's composure, something unexpected began to stir, a curiosity about the woman beneath the bridal white, the artist his investigators had mentioned, the daughter who had learned to disappear into silence. The reception ended with rice thrown into the night air, each grain catching the light from the cathedral entrance. Their car waited, decorated with flowers and "just married" signs that felt like mockery. As they drove towards separate hotel rooms in Manhattan, even their wedding night orchestrated by others, Myla stared out the window at the city's blurred lights. Dylan sat beside her in silence, his jaw tight with thoughts he wouldn't express. Neither of them knew that in 24 hours they'd be on a plane to Hawaii, trapped together in paradise. Neither of them suspected that the walls they'd so carefully built would begin to crack. And neither of them could imagine that a stolen kiss on a beach beneath the moonlight would change absolutely everything. For now they were simply two strangers bound by vows that meant nothing. Or so they thought. The private jet cut through the sky like a silver blade, leaving behind New York's gray coldness and heading toward the infinite blue of the Pacific. Inside the luxurious cabin, lined with cream leather and mahogany wood, Mila Harrington, now Mila Whitmore, though the name still felt strange in her mind, sat as far as possible from her new husband, fixing her gaze through the oval window as if the clouds could offer some answer she desperately needed. The silence between them was thick, almost palpable, filled only by the constant hum of the engines and the occasional discreet clink of crystal when the flight attendant served drinks that neither of them touched. 6 hours of flight ahead. 6 hours trapped in that elegant metal tube, pretending yesterday's wedding had been something more than corporate theater. Dylan worked on his laptop, fingers gliding over the keyboard with mechanical efficiency, but his eyes occasionally drifted to observe her. Mila could feel that gaze, intense, evaluating, disturbingly attentive. She wore a beige linen dress, simple and elegant, with her hair pulled back in a loose bun that allowed a few strands to frame her face. No elaborate makeup today, no mask of the perfect bride. Just her, raw and exhausted. "You should eat something," Dylan finally said, his voice breaking the silence like shattering glass. Deep, controlled, with a slight touch of concern she hadn't expected. Mila didn't turn. "I'm not hungry." "You haven't eaten anything since yesterday afternoon." "And how would you know?" She finally faced him, amber eyes blazing with defiance. "You were so busy networking with the guests you barely noticed I existed." Dylan closed the laptop slowly, giving her his full attention. His grey eyes, today they seemed darker, stormy, studied her with that unsettling intensity. "I noticed everything about you yesterday. I noticed you didn't smile genuinely once. I noticed your fingers trembled when we cut the cake. I noticed you almost ran when your father made that speech about finally getting your head straight." The words hit her like a punch to the stomach. Mila blinked, momentarily speechless. She hadn't expected him to have noticed. Hadn't expected him to care. "So you watched me like a guard watches a prisoner," she shot back, raising her shield again. "How romantic." A muscle jumped in Dylan's jaw. "I didn't pretend this was a fairy tale, Mila. You knew the terms. I knew the terms." "Terms?" She laughed, a bitter sound without humor. "You talk like we were signing a rental agreement, not marriage vows." "And isn't that basically what it is?" He leaned slightly forward, elbows resting on his knees, moving closer to her in the confined space. His scent, that sandalwood mixed with something she was beginning to recognize as uniquely his, invaded her senses. "Let's be honest with each other at least. Neither of us chose this. Neither of us wanted this." "You could have refused," Mila whispered, her voice loaded with accusation. "You're a grown man with your own fortune. You could have said no." Dylan was silent for a long moment, his eyes never leaving hers. When he finally spoke, there was something softer in his voice, something almost vulnerable. "And you couldn't?" The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Mila felt tears sting her eyes, but blinked fiercely, refusing to cry in front of him. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. "I tried," she admitted quietly, looking away again toward the window. "I tried to run away when I was 16. Packed a bag, took the money I'd saved from birthdays and made it all the way to the bus station. My father found me 2 hours later, said if I tried again he'd make sure I never painted again, that he'd destroy every canvas, every brush, every part of me that loved art." She felt, more than saw, Dylan tense beside her. The silence stretched, but this time it seemed different, less hostile, more charged with something she couldn't name. "My father told me love was weakness," Dylan said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. Mila turned to look at him, surprised by the unexpected confession. He was staring at his own hands, the elegant, strong hands she'd noticed at the altar. He built the Whitmore empire, treating people like chess pieces. My mother was one of those pieces, beautiful, cultured, perfect for photographs. But he never loved her. And she drank herself to death when I was 15, trying to fill the void he left. Mila felt something contract in her chest. Not sympathy, she wasn't ready for that. But recognition. They were products of families that valued legacies more than people, that measured success in assets, not affection. "So we're both orphans of living parents," she murmured. Dylan met her eyes, and for the first time, she saw something beyond calculated control there. She saw pain. She saw loneliness. She saw a reflection of her own prison. Seems like it. The flight attendant appeared discreetly, breaking the moment. We're beginning our descent. Please fasten your seatbelts. When the plane broke through the clouds, Hawaii revealed itself below them like an emerald jewel set in sapphire. White sand beaches kissed turquoise waters that sparkled under the tropical sun. Green volcanic mountains rose dramatically, their slopes covered in lush vegetation that seemed to pulse with life. It was breathtaking. It was perfect. It was a golden cage. The resort, Mauna Lani, one of the most exclusive on the Big Island, was everything money could buy. The entrance was marked by artificial waterfalls cascading over black lava rocks, flanked by palm trees that whispered with the salty sea breeze. Rare orchids bloomed in meticulously maintained gardens, and the distant sound of Hawaiian music floated through the air like a promise of romance that neither of them felt. They were greeted with leis, necklaces of fresh plumeria flowers, that were placed around their necks with warm aloha greetings and wide smiles. The sweet tropical fragrance of the flowers was intoxicating, enveloping Mila in a scent that felt like both an embrace and an accusation. Even paradise conspired to make this marriage seem real. "Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore," the manager said with excessive reverence, "it's an honor to receive you. We've prepared our presidential suite, full ocean view, private pool, and complete privacy." Privacy. The word sounded like both threat and promise. The suite was obscene in its opulence. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls opened onto an expansive terrace overlooking the Pacific Ocean, where waves crashed against coral reefs in bursts of white foam. Inside, minimalist decor in white and beige tones was punctuated by Hawaiian touches: koa wood sculptures, tapa art hanging on the walls, tropical fabrics on strategically placed pillows. And there was only one bedroom. A king-size bed dominated the space, covered in pristine white linen and surrounded by sheer curtains that swayed gently with the sea breeze entering through the open doors. Mila froze in the doorway, staring at the bed as if it were a battlefield. Dylan noticed her tension immediately. "I'll sleep on the couch," he said simply, indicating the elegant leather sofa near the windows. "You don't have to," she began, but he interrupted her. "I didn't touch you last night. I won't touch you today. Or tomorrow." His grey eyes met hers, steady and serious. "Not unless you ask." Something in his declaration, the certainty of it, the implicit respect, made Mila's heart do an uncomfortable flip. She nodded stiffly, unable to trust her voice. The following days established a strange pattern. They moved around each other like planets in separate orbits, polite, distant, painfully aware of each other's presence. Dylan worked in the mornings, making calls to the winery, while Mila explored the resort gardens, her fingers itching for brushes she hadn't brought. But at dusk, when the sun transformed the sky into layers of orange, pink, and purple that seemed painted by a divine artist, they both found themselves inevitably on the terrace, watching the transformation in silence. It was during these moments that Mila began to notice things about Dylan that she didn't want to notice. The way his shoulders relaxed when he thought she wasn't looking. The way he closed his eyes and breathed in deeply the salty air, as if trying to absorb something he was missing. The loneliness that emanated from him in waves, mirroring her own. On one of those evenings, as the sound of waves filled the silence between them, Dylan finally said, "Do you miss painting?" Mila looked at him, surprised by the question. "Every day, every moment." He nodded slowly, as if he understood perfectly. "I used to love making wine. Not the business of it, the actual process. Crushing grapes, tasting the must, waiting for fermentation. It was peaceful, creative." "Used to?" Mila asked softly. "I don't have time anymore. The empire demands constant attention." He paused, then added so quietly she almost didn't hear. "Sometimes I wonder if what I've built is worth what I sacrificed." Mila didn't respond. There was nothing to say. But for the first time since they'd entered that cathedral, she felt something besides resentment toward the man beside her. She felt curiosity, and that scared her more than hatred ever could. Morning came to Hawaii as it always did, with an explosion of golden light that transformed the ocean into a mirror of diamonds. and filled the air with the melodious song of tropical birds. Mila woke early, as she had every day since their arrival, unable to sleep past dawn. Dreams haunted her, images of blank canvases waiting for paint, of colors she could no longer mix, of a version of herself that had been systematically erased. She rose quietly, careful not to wake Dylan, who slept on the couch as promised. Over the past 3 days, they'd fallen into a strange routine of polite coexistence. He worked, she walked, and in the evenings they shared the terrace in silences that were beginning to feel less hostile and more contemplative. Wearing a white silk robe provided by the resort, Mila stepped out onto the private terrace. The morning breeze carried the scent of hibiscus flowers and sea salt, a combination she was already beginning to associate with that strange limbo between anger and acceptance where she found herself. Her eyes wandered across the horizon, that infinite blue that seemed to promise freedom she'd never reach. "Coffee!" Dylan's deep voice made her turn. He stood in the doorway, wearing only grey cotton pajama pants, his bare torso revealing a more athletic body than she'd expected. Defined muscles without excess, a broad chest that suggested natural strength rather than obsessive hours at the gym. A thin scar ran along his ribs, an untold story marked on his skin. Mila looked away quickly, irritated at herself for noticing. "Yes, thank you." They drank coffee in silence, sitting in wicker chairs that creaked softly with each movement. Dylan hadn't put on a shirt, and Mila found herself avoiding looking directly at him, focusing instead on the porcelain cup between her hands. The coffee was rich, with notes of macadamia, a local blend she was beginning to appreciate. "I need to go to downtown Kona today," Dylan said eventually, breaking the silence. "Meeting with a local distributor. I'm trying to expand our presence in the Pacific market." "Of course," Mila replied, relieved at the prospect of a few hours alone. "I'll stay here." He hesitated, fingers drumming lightly on his cup. "You could come with me, if you want. There are art galleries in Kona. I thought you might—" He stopped, looking uncomfortable, as if he wasn't used to offering kindness without expectations. "No, thank you," Mila said quickly, her defenses rising automatically. "I don't want to get in the way of your business." Dylan nodded, but she caught a flash of something in his eyes, disappointment, frustration. Before she could analyze it, he stood up. "I'll be back late afternoon." Mila spent the morning wandering the resort, but her mind was restless. She found herself at the spa, then in the gardens, finally on the beach where tourists laughed and children built sandcastles. Families, couples holding hands, lovers kissing in the waves, all of them living versions of love she would never know. She returned to the suite around 3 in the afternoon, emotionally exhausted more than physically. The door opened silently, and she entered expecting the familiar emptiness of the vacant space. But what greeted her stole her breath. In the center of the living room, where before there had been only elegant, empty furniture, now stood a professional cherry wood easel. Beside it, a folding table had been transformed into a workstation. Dozens of acrylic paint tubes organized by color, from creamy whites to blacks as deep as midnight, passing through every imaginable hue of the rainbow. Brushes of all sizes were arranged in glass jars, rounds, flats, fans, liners. There were blank canvases carefully stacked against the wall, polished wooden pallets, solvents, clean cotton rags, a complete studio. Professional, expensive, perfect. Mila's legs nearly gave out. She approached slowly, as if the materials might disappear if she moved too quickly. Her fingers touched a brush, genuine sable hair, soft as silk, and something inside her broke. Tears burned her eyes and began to fall before she could stop them. She hadn't cried since the wedding day, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her broken. But now, alone with these instruments of her soul, she crumbled. "I thought you might need this." Mila spun, face wet with tears, and found Dylan standing in the doorway. He'd returned early. He was holding a brown paper bag, and his eyes, those stormy grey eyes, watched her with an intensity that made her forget to breathe. You did this?" Her voice came out hoarse, broken. "I called some galleries this morning, asked them to send the best materials they had." He entered the space, placing the bag on the table. "And I brought Hawaiian coffee and malasadas. Thought you might want something while you work." Malasadas, the local Portuguese donut, still warm, dusted with crystallized sugar. The sweet smell filled the air. Mila couldn't process what was happening. This man, this stranger she'd sworn to hate, had paid attention, had cared enough to find out what she loved and bring it back. Why? The question came out as a whisper. Dylan studied her for a long moment, hands shoved in his pants pockets, as if he didn't know what to do with them. "Because I saw your paintings." "What?" Mila blinked, confused. "Before the wedding, when our parents were negotiating the terms, I investigated you. It's what I do, analyze investments, assess risks." He paused, something that looked like shame crossing his features. "I found an article in a local newspaper from 5 years ago. A small gallery had exhibited work by emerging artists. You were one of them. There was a photo of you standing next to a painting, a woman trapped in a glass cage with butterfly wings trying to open." Mila remembered that painting. Her father had destroyed it 2 weeks after the exhibition, saying she was sending the wrong message about the Harrington family. "The painting was extraordinary," Dylan continued, his voice soft but firm. "Raw, honest, painful. And I thought that if I had something that made me feel that alive, I'd fight tooth and nail not to lose it." He met her eyes. "You shouldn't have to lose this too." The air between them shifted, charging with something neither was ready to name. Mila felt her heart pounding against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that seemed too loud in the sweet silence. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "Then don't say anything. Just paint." And then, for the first time in years, Mila allowed herself to do exactly that. She prepared her palette with hands that trembled with anticipation, chose a medium canvas, and stood before the easel with a brush in her hands. The light coming through the glass doors was perfect, soft, golden, transforming everything into warm tones. Dylan didn't leave. Instead, he sat on the nearby couch, watching in silence. Initially, Mila felt self-conscious, hyper-aware of every brushstroke, every color mix. But gradually, as the colors began to come alive on the canvas, the outside world disappeared. She painted what she felt, not what she saw. Strokes of deep blue representing loneliness, touches of vibrant red for anger, soft oranges for a hesitant hope she didn't want to admit she felt. The colors merged and danced, creating abstract shapes that suggested human figures, two beings orbiting each other, never touching but inexorably connected. Hours passed. The sun began its descent, painting the sky with its own dramatic hues. Mila finally stepped back, exhausted but strangely satisfied. "Can I see?" Dylan asked softly. She hesitated, then nodded. He approached, standing beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body, the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with the faint smell of sweat and something more basic, masculine. Dylan studied the painting in silence, his eyes traveling over every brushstroke. Mila watched him watching it, trying to decipher his reaction. His jaw was tense, a muscle pulsing slightly. His hands were clenched at his sides. "It's about us," he finally said, not a question but a statement. "Yes, it's beautiful and devastating." He turned to look at her, and suddenly they were too close. She could see the darker flecks in his grey eyes, the slight shadow of stubble on his jaw, the way his lips parted slightly with each breath. "You see me differently than I see myself," Dylan murmured, his voice rough. "I paint what's hidden," Mila whispered back. "The parts people don't show." "And what do you see in me?" The question hung between them, loaded with danger and possibility. Mila should pull back, should raise her walls again. But something in that moment, the vulnerability in his eyes, the gift he'd given her, the way he looked at her like she was a mystery he desperately wanted to solve, stopped her. "I see someone who's as trapped as I am," she admitted. "Someone who built a prison so beautiful everyone thinks it's a palace. Someone who forgot how to be free." Dylan's breath caught. He raised his hand slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently brushed a strand of hair that had fallen across her face. His fingers grazed her cheek, leaving a trail of heat on her skin. "Mila," He said her name like a prayer, a question, a confession. Her heart was beating so hard she was certain he could hear it. They stood there, frozen in that moment of almost touch, as the sun set outside and painted the world in shades of fire. Then Dylan stepped back, dropping his hand. "You must be hungry. I'll order dinner." And just like that, the moment broke. But something had changed irreversibly between them. A crack had opened in the wall they'd both built so carefully, and through that crack, something dangerous was beginning to grow. The full moon hung in the Hawaiian sky like a giant pearl suspended in black velvet, its silver light spilling over the ocean and transforming each wave into liquid mercury. The stars shone with an intensity impossible to see in big cities. Entire constellations painted across the firmament, as if a cosmic artist had splattered luminous paint on an infinite canvas. Mila sat on the terrace, wrapped in a light cotton shawl, her bare feet propped on the chair while she hugged her knees to her chest. The night air was perfect, neither hot nor cold, just that delicious balance that made her skin tingle softly. The sound of the waves was like constant breathing, a rhythm that seemed to sync with her own heart. She'd painted all day, losing herself completely in the process for the first time in years. 3 canvases already rested against the sweet wool, each exploring different aspects of the emotion she couldn't name, that confusing mixture of resentment and gratitude, of loneliness and hesitant connection. "Can I join you?" Dylan appeared in the doorway carrying a wine bottle and 2 crystal glasses. He'd traded his business attire for something more casual, a white linen shirt with the top buttons open, revealing the curve of his collarbone, and grey cotton pants. His feet were also bare, a detail Mila found strangely intimate. "It's your terrace too," she replied, but her tone lacked its usual coldness. Something had softened between them since the gift of art supplies. Dylan settled into the chair beside her, placing the glasses on the small glass table between them. With practiced, elegant movements, he opened the bottle, a manual corkscrew, not electric, extracting the cork with a satisfying pop that seemed loud in the night's silence. "This is one of ours," he said as he poured the wine, the dark red liquid catching the moonlight. 2018 Pinot Noir, one of my favorite vintages. That year was perfect. Enough rain in spring, consistent heat in summer, and that delicate balance at harvest. He handed her a glass, and when their fingers touched briefly in the exchange, Mila felt that now familiar electric current run through her skin. She took the glass quickly, bringing it to her lips to cover the moment. The wine was extraordinary. Notes of black cherry and warm spices exploded on her palate, followed by a smooth finish that had layers of vanilla and something earthy, primal. It was like drinking liquid history, as if each sip told the story of the land where the grapes grew. "It's incredible," she admitted, unable to hide her genuine appreciation. A small smile, the first real one she'd seen on him, curved Dylan's lips. And that smile completely transformed his face. The hard lines softened. His eyes sparkled with something that seemed like genuine pleasure, and for a moment he looked years younger, like the man he might have been, without the weight of the empire on his shoulders. "My grandfather used to say, 'Good wine is like good art. Both capture a moment in time and preserve it forever,'" Dylan said, his voice low and contemplative. He loved our vineyards, spent hours among the vines, talking to the plants like they were old friends. "He sounds like he was special," Mila said softly. He was. Dylan took a long sip, looking out at the ocean. "He died when I was 12. Sudden heart attack. One day, he was teaching me to identify ripe grapes by touch. The next day, he was just gone. I'm sorry." That's when everything changed. His words came out as if he hadn't planned them, as if the wine and the moon and that moment of quiet had loosened something he normally kept locked. My father took over completely, transformed something that was about passion and craftsmanship into just numbers and profit margins. He fired half the employees who'd been with us for generations, automated processes my grandfather insisted needed to be done by hand, expanded aggressively without caring about quality. Mila watched him, seeing for the first time beyond the cold corporate facade. There was real pain there, genuine loss. "And you?" she asked gently. "Did you want to continue your grandfather's legacy or your father's?" Dylan laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "That's the question, isn't it? When you spend your whole life trying to prove you're worthy of the name you carry, You forget to ask if that's what you really want. He turned to look at her, and there was something raw in his eyes, something vulnerable. I built an empire even bigger than my father dreamed. We expanded into international markets, won awards, tripled our value, and you know what I discovered? What? That I don't remember what our wine tastes like. I mean, really taste it, not evaluate it for market value or flavor profile for critics, but just appreciate it. He looked at the glass in his hand, as if for the first time. Until tonight. This is the first wine I've actually savored in years. The weight of his confession hung between them. Mila felt her chest tighten with unexpected empathy. They were more alike than she wanted to admit. Both living lives designed by others, both having forgotten who they really were beneath the expectations. My father destroyed my first painting when I was 7, she heard herself saying, the words coming out before she could stop them. The wine was loosening her own tongue, bringing down walls she kept rigidly raised. It was a self-portrait, brutal and honest the way only children can be. I'd painted myself with sad eyes and a closed mouth. He said it was disturbing and inappropriate. Said I should paint beautiful things, things people wanted to see, not the truth. Dylan leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, his full attention focused on her. But you kept painting, in secret. Hid sketchbooks under my mattress, painted in locked rooms when he was traveling. Every brushstroke felt like an act of rebellion, a small piece of me he couldn't control. She took another sip of wine, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. Until that exhibition, when he found out, when he saw my art publicly, it was like I'd betrayed the family. He made sure I never got another chance. Until now, Dylan said softly. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding, a recognition of equally wounded souls. The moon poured silver light over them, making Dylan's grey eyes almost luminous, accentuating every plane and angle of his face. Why did you do it? Mila asked, the question that had been tormenting her since she'd seen the art supplies. Why did you care enough to bring back my painting? Dylan was silent for a long moment, swirling the wine in his glass, watching how the liquid captured and refracted the moonlight. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely more than a whisper. Because when my mother died, she left a letter. I found it years later, hidden in an old poetry book. It was for me. He paused, his jaw tightening with emotion. She wrote that her biggest regret was allowing my father to erase who she really was, that she hoped I'd be stronger, that I'd never let anyone steal my essence. His hands trembled slightly as he set the glass back on the table. But I did. I let my father mold me into a replica of himself, let the board of directors dictate every decision, and when my grandmother said I needed to marry, I just obeyed. Again, he finally looked at her, and there were unshed tears glistening in his eyes. When I saw your paintings, when I read about you, I realized I was doing the same thing, taking someone's essence away, and I didn't want to be that person anymore. Mila felt tears sting her own eyes. Without thinking, she reached out and took his hand. Their fingers intertwined, palm against palm, skin warmed by wine and moonlight, and something deeper. We're not just prisoners, she whispered. We're our own jailers. Then maybe we can set ourselves free together. The suggestion hung in the air like a dangerous promise. They sat there, hands intertwined, eyes locked on each other, while the ocean breathed and the stars witnessed, and the moon poured its silver blessing over two strangers who were slowly ceasing to be strangers. Dylan raised his free hand and gently brushed another strand of hair from Mila's face, but this time his fingers lingered, tracing the line of her jaw with a reverence that took her breath away. His thumb grazed her lower lip, and she involuntarily parted it, her breathing becoming shallow. Mila, he murmured her name like a prayer, his face moving closer to hers. She could feel his breath, wine and promises, mingling with her own. Her eyes fell to his lips, and she wondered what they would taste like. If that chaste kiss at the altar had been just a preview of something more consuming. But then Dylan stopped, his forehead almost touching hers, his eyes closed as if he were fighting an internal battle. If I kiss you now, he whispered, his voice rough with restraint, it won't be because someone told us to. It will be because I want to, because you drive me crazy, because you're the first real thing I've felt in years." Myla's heart was beating so hard, she was certain he could feel it. She should pull back, should remember that she hated this man, that this marriage was a prison, that vulnerability was dangerous. But instead she whispered, "What if I want to too?" Dylan's eyes opened, stormy grey meeting molten amber, and in that look was the promise of everything to come, danger and desire, fear and hope, the terrible and wonderful possibility that maybe, just maybe, this prison could transform into something more. But before either could close the distance, Dylan's phone rang, a jarring sound that broke the spell. He cursed softly, checking the screen. "It's from the winery, emergency." The moment was lost, but the promise remained, hanging between them like incense smoke waiting to be claimed. The beach was transformed into something out of a tropical dream. Tiki torches flamed against the twilight sky, their flames dancing to the rhythm of the sea breeze and casting golden shadows over the white sand. Garlands of exotic flowers, white plumerias, red hibiscus, purple orchids, hung between palm trees, creating a fragrant natural canopy that enveloped everything in sweet, intoxicating fragrance. The resort had organized a traditional Hawaiian luau for guests, a complete celebration with local musicians, hula dancers, and an extensive table filled with island delicacies. The aroma of kalua pork slowly roasted in an underground imu, mixed with the smell of grilled pineapple, mahi-mahi fish seasoned with ginger, and creamy poi. Paper lanterns swayed gently, creating earthly constellations that mirrored the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Mila stood at the entrance to her suite, looking at her reflection in the full-length mirror, with a mixture of apprehension and something dangerously close to excitement. The dress Dylan had mysteriously provided, another unexpected gift that left her emotionally off balance, was breathtaking. Red, not a shy or apologetic red, but a heart-stopping red, deep scarlet that seemed to capture both fire and blood. The fluid silk fabric embraced her curves with almost indecent precision, the V-neckline plunging just enough to suggest without revealing, the thin straps leaving her shoulders bare and vulnerable. The skirt fell to her ankles in layers that moved like liquid water with each step, a side slit rising to her thigh and offering tempting glimpses of leg when she walked. She'd left her hair down, chestnut waves cascading over her bare back in a messy cascade that seemed both wild and romantic. Minimal makeup, just a touch of color on her lips that matched the dress, and a subtle shimmer on her eyelids that made her amber eyes seem luminous, feline, dangerous. She didn't recognize herself. This woman in the mirror wasn't the resigned bride from the cathedral or the silent wife of the past few days. This was someone new, someone beginning to remember who she was before others told her who she should be. "Myla," Dylan's voice came from the living room. "Are you ready?" She took a deep breath, lifting her chin with newfound determination, and stepped out of the bedroom. Dylan was waiting near the glass doors, and when he turned and saw her, the entire world seemed to stop. His eyes traveled over her, not with the evaluating, cold gaze she expected from businessmen, but with something primal and hungry that brought every nerve ending in her body to life. His jaw tightened visibly, the muscles in his neck tensing, and she saw his hands clench at his sides as if he were physically preventing himself from reaching for her. "You're Christ, Mila." His voice came out hoarse, rough in a way that sent molten heat through her veins. "You're absolutely stunning." Dylan had also transformed. He wore beige linen pants and a white long-sleeved shirt he'd rolled up to his elbows, revealing muscular tanned forearms. The top buttons were open, offering a glimpse of the chest she remembered seeing him shirtless. His dark hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd run his fingers through it repeatedly, a nervous gesture she was beginning to recognize. He looked less like the ruthless CEO and more like a dangerously attractive man who knew exactly the effect he had on her. "You don't look so bad yourself," Mila managed to say, hating how her voice came out breathless and unsteady. Something dark and promising flashed in Dylan's grey eyes. He approached slowly, like a predator not wanting to startle his prey, and offered his arm. "Ready to pretend we're a happy honeymoon couple." But there was a hint of playfulness in his words now, a teasing that hadn't existed before. And when Myla placed her hand on his elbow, feeling the warmth of his skin through the fine linen, She realized they might not be entirely pretending anymore. The beach was full of resort guests, intertwined couples, laughing families, groups of friends toasting with Mai Tais and tropical margaritas. The hosts had placed low tables surrounded by cushions in the sand, creating intimate areas where people could sit and dine while watching the entertainment. Musicians played ukuleles and Hawaiian guitars, melodies floating through the night air like liquid prayers. The sound was hypnotic, joyful yet melancholic, simple yet deeply emotional. A singer with a voice like golden honey sang in Hawaiian, words Mila didn't understand, but that touched something primal in her soul. Dylan guided her to a table slightly away from the main crowd, where they'd have a perfect view of the makeshift stage, but still maintain some privacy. He helped her sit, his fingers lightly brushing her bare shoulders, a touch so brief it could have been accidental, but the shiver that ran down her spine told her it wasn't. They were served traditional dishes, the kalua pork that melted in the mouth, creamy Hawaiian macaroni salad, fresh tuna poke seasoned with shoyu and sesame oil, haupia, coconut pudding that was sweet and heavenly. Dylan insisted she try the poi, the purple taro mash that was a Hawaiian staple. "It's an acquired taste," he admitted with a mischievous smile when she grimaced. "You could have warned me first," she replied, but there was laughter in her voice, something light and genuine that surprised her. They ate and talked, not about business or family obligations, but about small, unimportant things that somehow felt monumental. Favorite movies, books that changed them, places they dreamed of visiting. Dylan spoke about his desire to see the Tuscan vineyards during harvest, to learn ancient techniques from Italian masters. Mila confessed her dream of painting on the Amalfi Coast, of capturing that Mediterranean light so many artists before her had chased. "So let's go," Dylan said suddenly, his eyes shining with an intensity that caught her off guard. "What?" "Tuscany. Amalfi. After we get back home, after I resolve some urgent company matters. Let's go. Just the two of us. No agendas, no expectations. Just exploration." Mila's heart skipped. It was a fantasy she knew, a beautiful lie told under tropical stars and the influence of coconut wine. But the way he looked at her, as if he really meant it, made something inside her want to believe. "I'd like that," she whispered. Before Dylan could respond, the drums changed, from soft melody to pulsing, primal rhythm. The hula dancers took the stage, their bodies moving with a grace that was both sacred and sensual. Grass skirts swayed hypnotically, hands told stories without words. Hips undulated in patterns that seemed as ancient as the islands themselves. The host, a large Hawaiian man with traditional tattoos covering his arms, took the microphone. "And now we invite our guest to join us in the dance. Don't be shy. Let the spirit of aloha guide you." Couples began to stand, laughing nervously as they headed to the improvised dance area in the sand. The rhythm was contagious, impossible to resist, tribal beats that seemed to pulse through the earth and straight into the blood. Dylan stood and extended his hand to Mila. "Dance with me." It wasn't a question, and something in the way he looked at her, challenging, hopeful, vulnerable, made it impossible to refuse. She placed her hand in his, and he pulled her up in one fluid motion that brought her dangerously close to his body. They walked to the dance area, the sand cold and soft under their bare feet, and suddenly they were in the middle of it all, fire and music and bodies moving in primal rhythm. Dylan placed one hand on her waist, the other still holding hers, and began to move. He danced surprisingly well, not with the technical precision of formal lessons, but with a natural fluidity that suggested confidence in his own body. His hips found the rhythm instantly, his chest brushing against hers with every beat. Mila let herself be guided, her own movements responding instinctively to his. The red dress swirled around her legs, the slit revealing flashes of thigh that she saw Dylan notice, his eyes darkening with each glimpse. The music accelerated, the rhythm becoming more urgent, more demanding. Dylan pulled her closer, his arm now wrapping completely around her waist, his hands splayed against her bare back. The touch of skin against skin sent electricity running the entire length of her spine. They moved together as if they'd danced 1,000 times before, their bodies finding a rhythm that was uniquely theirs. The world around them disappeared. There were no other dancers, no audience, just the two of them, and the tribal beat and the fire reflecting in each other's eyes. Mila raised her arms, intertwining them around Dylan's neck, bringing them so close there was no space between them. She could feel the heat of his body through the thin dress, could feel the muscles of his abdomen contracting against her, could feel something hard pressing against her hip that made her core pulse with liquid heat. Dylan's eyes were storms, dark grey and hungry and full of dangerous promises. His fingers traced patterns on her bare back, up and down her spine in a way that was purely possessive. "Mila," he murmured against her ear, his voice too rough to be comfortable. "You're killing me in this dress." She smiled against his neck, a mischievous, powerful expression. "Good," he growled, a low, primal sound she felt vibrate through his chest, and suddenly he was spinning her back against his chest, his hips pressed against her in a way that left no doubt about what he was feeling. His hands landed on her hips, guiding her movements in a rhythm that was obscene in its suggestion. Mila let her head fall back against his shoulder, turning slightly so her lips brushed his jaw. She felt Dylan choke, felt his hands tighten on her flesh, felt every muscle in his body tense with restraint. The music reached a crescendo, and then, suddenly, stopped. The dancers around them burst into applause and laughter, but Mila and Dylan remained frozen, breathless, trapped in a bubble of desire that threatened to consume them completely. "I need air," Mila whispered, her voice trembling. Dylan nodded stiffly, and without a word took her hand and guided her away from the crowd. They walked along the beach, leaving the lights and sounds of the luau behind, moving toward a more isolated area where only the moon offered illumination. The waves lapped at the shore with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the storm building between them. Dylan stopped abruptly, releasing her hand to run his fingers through his hair, that nervous gesture she recognized. "Mila, He turned to face her, and the anguish in his face stopped her. "I can't keep pretending." "Pretending what?" "That this isn't affecting me. That you're not affecting me." He took a step toward her, then another, until they were as close as they'd been dancing. "From the moment I lifted that veil and saw your eyes, something in me changed, broke, woke up." Mila's heart was beating so hard she could barely breathe. "Dylan, let me finish. Please." His voice was raw, desperate. "I've spent my entire life in control, of everything, of everyone. But with you, I have no control. You terrify me, challenge me, make me question everything I've built. And I should hate that, should hate you for doing this to me." He raised his hand, tracing his fingers along her jaw, down her neck, leaving trails of fire where he touched. "But I don't hate you. Christ, Mila, I want you in a way that doesn't make sense, in a way that's illogical and irrational and completely consuming." Tears stung Mila's eyes, tears she couldn't name. "You think this is easy for me? You think I wanted to feel anything for you? I promised I'd hate you forever. And do you still hate me?" The question hung between them, loaded with the weight of everything that had changed. "No," she finally whispered, the admission torn from somewhere deep. "I don't know what I feel for you, but it's not hatred." Something broke in Dylan. The last restraint, the last wall. He pulled her against him with an urgency that stole her breath, his hands burying in her hair, tilting her face up. "Tell me to stop," he pleaded, his lips inches from hers. "If you don't want this, tell me now, because if I kiss you this time, Mila, it won't be chaste. It won't be for cameras or out of obligation. It will be because I need to taste you or I'll go insane." Mila looked into those stormy gray eyes, seeing in them all the desire and fear and hope she herself felt, and made the most terrifying decision of her life. "Then don't stop." Dylan kissed her, and it was nothing like the kiss at the altar. This kiss was fire and hunger, and years of loneliness finally finding connection. His lips captured hers with an intensity that made her knees buckle, his tongue demanding entrance she immediately granted. The taste of him, wine and desire and something uniquely Dylan, exploded through her senses. She clung to him, her hands running over his back, feeling the muscles contract beneath her palms. He pulled her closer, impossibly closer, until there was no space between them, only heat and need and the promise of more. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, the world had changed irreversibly. and Mila knew, with terrible and wonderful certainty, that she would never be the same again. The morning after the luau dawned with a flawless sky, deep blue without a single cloud, the sun pouring golden light over the ocean that sparkled like polished glass. But inside the suite, the atmosphere was completely different from the paradise outside. Mila woke alone in the king-size bed, the white linen covers tangled around her body like evidence of a restless night. Memories of the kiss on the beach flooded her mind in warm waves, the way Dylan held her, the taste of him, the raw intensity in his eyes when they finally pulled apart. They'd returned to the suite in charged silence, fingers intertwined, but at the door, Dylan had hesitated. "I don't want to rush this," he'd whispered, his voice rough with restraint. "You deserve more than impulsive desire on a beach." And then he'd kissed her gently, tenderly, before retreating to the couch as he always did. But something fundamental had changed between them. The walls had fallen, and now they were in unknown territory, vulnerable and exposed. Mila got up, wearing a silk robe, and found the terrace empty. A note was tucked under a cup of still warm coffee. "Emergency meeting with distributor. Back by noon. Special dinner tonight. Just the two of us. D." An involuntary smile curved her lips. She spent the morning painting, a new canvas exploring red and grey intertwining, merging, creating something new and indefinable. The colors danced under her brush, capturing the confusion and hope she felt. Around 11, she decided to go down to the resort's main pool. Maybe some sun and fresh air would help organize her chaotic thoughts. She put on a simple but elegant white bikini covered by a turquoise silk sarong and grabbed a book she had no real intention of reading. The pool area was a tropical oasis, palm trees providing strategic shade, comfortable lounge chairs lined in perfect rows, waiters circulating with trays of colorful drinks adorned with paper umbrellas and fresh fruit slices. The smell of sunscreen mixed with the scent of jasmine flowers growing on trellises around the area. Mila found an isolated lounge chair away from the noisy families and clingy couples and settled in. The warm breeze caressed her skin, and she closed her eyes, allowing herself to relax for the first time in days. "Excuse me, is this chair taken?" The voice was feminine, soft, melodious, with a slight accent Mila couldn't identify. She opened her eyes and found a woman standing beside her lounge chair, holding a designer beach bag and wearing enormous sunglasses that hid half her face. "No, feel free," Mila replied politely, though there were dozens of empty chairs around. The woman settled into the adjacent chair with graceful, practiced movements. She was stunning in a way that made Mila instantly conscious of her own imperfections. Platinum blonde hair falling in perfect waves over tanned shoulders, a model's body with curves in all the right places, skin without a single mark. Her bikini was tiny and expensive, probably from some Italian brand Mila would never hear about. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" the woman said, removing her sunglasses to reveal emerald green eyes that were disturbingly feline. "I love this resort. I've been coming here for years." "It's my first time," Mila replied, trying to focus on her book. "Honeymoon?" The question came with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mila hesitated just a fraction of a second. "Yes." "How lovely." The woman tilted her head, studying Mila with an intensity that seemed calculated. "You look familiar." "I was at the luau last night. You were dancing with a tall man, dark hair, extremely handsome. You two were absolutely on fire on the dance floor." A blush rose up Mila's neck. "My husband." "Husband." The word was pronounced with something that seemed like amusement. "How quick. When did you get married?" "A few days ago." Mila was beginning to feel uncomfortable. There was something predatory in the way this woman watched her, like a cat playing with a mouse before the fatal strike. "Fascinating. Whirlwind wedding or long planned?" "I'm sorry, but I didn't catch your name," Mila said, her voice gaining a defensive edge. The woman smiled, a slow, dangerous smile that made Mila's stomach turn. "Where are my manners? I'm Isabelle Laurent, and I know your husband very, very well." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Mila sat up straight, every muscle in her body tensing. "What did you say?" "Dylan Whitmore." Isabelle pronounced the name as if it were a wine she was savoring. "We have history, quite a lot of history actually. It surprises me that he never mentioned it. But then Dylan was always good at compartmentalizing. Mila's blood ran cold. "You're lying." "Am I?" Isabel reached into her bag and pulled out a phone, sliding through photos with perfectly manicured fingers. She turned the screen toward Mila. "This is from Whitmore Vineyards, about 8 months ago. And this is from Monaco, last year. And this one. Photo after photo. Dylan with Isabel. Dylan smiling at Isabel. Dylan with his arm around Isabel's waist at a gala. Dylan kissing Isabel's cheek on a yacht at sunset. Each image was like a blade to Mila's chest. "We broke up about 6 months ago," Isabel continued, her voice too casual. "Or rather, he broke up with me. Said he needed to focus on business, that he didn't have time for relationships. Imagine my surprise when I heard he got married." Her green eyes pierced Mila. "To someone who's clearly not from our world." The veiled insult hit its target. Mila felt shame and anger burning in her chest, mixing into a toxic storm. She stood abruptly, tying the sarong around her waist with trembling fingers. "Where are you going?" Isabel asked with false innocence. "I thought we could chat. Exchange stories about Dylan. I'm sure I have some you'd love to hear." "Go to hell," Mila said through clenched teeth, and marched toward the exit. But not before hearing Isabel's laughter, crystalline and cruel, echoing behind her. Mila returned to the suite in a blur of fury and pain. How dare Dylan? How dare he kiss her that way, make promises with his eyes, make her start to feel something, when he had a model ex-girlfriend who apparently still orbited his life? She was back in the bedroom, quickly changing into jeans and a t-shirt, when she heard the suite door open. "Mila?" Dylan's voice, warm and hopeful. "I'm back early. Thought we could have lunch and then—" He stopped abruptly when she emerged from the bedroom, her face a mask of contained anger. "Who is Isabel Laurent?" Mila demanded, without preamble. Dylan's expression changed instantly, from happy anticipation to something that looked like guilt and frustration. His eyes closed briefly. "Shit. Shit is right." Mila crossed her arms over her chest, a defensive posture trying to contain the pain, threatening to overflow. "She's here, at the resort. And she just showed me pictures of you two together. Lots of pictures. Mila, I can explain..." "Explain what? That you had a beautiful model girlfriend you conveniently forgot to mention, that while you were telling me I affected you, you had a woman waiting in the wings." "It's not like that." Dylan took a step toward her, but Mila backed away, and she saw pain cross his face at the movement. "Isabel and I broke up months before the marriage was arranged. She means nothing to me." "Means nothing?" Mila laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "She clearly still has feelings for you, and frankly, looking at her, I can't blame her. She's exactly the type of woman someone like you should be with. Sophisticated, glamorous, from your world." "What the hell do you mean by someone like me?" Dylan shot back, his own anger beginning to flare. "You think I care about that? About social status and appearances? You cared enough to marry me because of it. This whole marriage is about status and appearances." The silence that followed was deafening. The words hung between them like broken glass, cutting everything they'd carefully built over the past few days. "Is that what you really think?" Dylan finally asked, his voice dangerously low. "That this," he gestured between them, "is just about appearances? I don't know what to think anymore." Tears burned Mila's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "I was starting to feel something, to believe that maybe this could be real. And then she shows up with proof that you're exactly what I feared, a rich playboy who collects beautiful women like trophies." "Do you really believe that?" Dylan closed the distance between them in 2 long strides, his hands grasping her arms, firm but not hurting. His grey eyes blazed with an intensity that made her want to pull back and lean closer at the same time. "You think what I feel for you is superficial. What do you feel for me?" Mila challenged, her voice trembling. "You barely know me. I know you bite your lower lip when you're concentrating on painting. I know you take your coffee black, but add 3 spoonfuls of sugar when you think no one's looking. I know you have a small scar behind your left ear from when you fell out of a tree at 10. I know you sleep on the right side of the bed, but always wake up in the center. I know that when you're angry, your eyes turn gold like right now." Each word was like an arrow, piercing her defenses. "I know." Dylan continued, his voice dropping to a rough whisper, their faces so close she could feel his warm breath against her skin, that you terrify me, that you turn my world upside down, that I've spent my entire life in control, and then you showed up and destroyed all of that. And I know that what I feel for you is nothing like what I felt for Isabel or any other woman before you. The tears finally escaped, tracing warm paths down her cheeks. You should have told me about her. You're right. I should have. His hands moved to cup her face, thumbs gently wiping away her tears. But Mila, she's the past. Done. Finished. Christ, you're everything I didn't know I was looking for. How can I believe you? Her voice broke. How do I know I won't end up like just another Isabel, replaced when something better comes along? Dylan pressed his forehead to hers, his eyes closing as if he were in pain. Because she never made me feel. She was beautiful and convenient and exactly what everyone expected. But when I kissed her, it was empty, like eating food without seasoning, like living in black and white. He opened his eyes, and what Mila saw there stole her breath. Raw vulnerability, genuine fear, and something bigger she wasn't ready to name. And then I kissed you, he whispered, and suddenly the world was in color. Suddenly I was hungry for the first time in my life. Suddenly everything mattered. Mila felt something inside her break and reform simultaneously. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted so badly to believe. She still wants you, Mila whispered. I saw it in her eyes. I don't care what she wants. Dylan's fingers buried in her hair, his voice becoming fierce. The only woman I care about is here in front of me, destroying me and rebuilding me at the same time. Dylan, let me prove it to you. His voice was urgent now, desperate. Let me prove this is real. That you're different. That I will never ever treat you like a trophy or second choice. Mila looked into those stormy grey eyes, seeing all the fear and hope mirrored there, and made a decision. Maybe reckless, maybe foolish, but completely, unequivocally hers. Then prove it. And this time, when Dylan kissed her, she kissed back with everything she had. All the anger and fear and impossible hope pouring between them like spilled wine, staining everything it touched, impossible to clean. The sun was beginning its slow descent toward the horizon when Dylan guided Mila out of the resort, their fingers intertwined with a firmness that suggested he had no intention of letting go anytime soon. They'd spent the previous afternoon in charged silences after the confrontation about Isabel. Stolen kisses interrupted by honest, painful conversations about expectations, fears, and the unknown territory where they found themselves. Dylan had confronted Isabel personally, his voice cold and definitive echoing through the resort lobby, while Mila watched from a safe distance. Leave the resort, leave my life. What we had ended a long time ago, and you showing up here was inappropriate and cruel. Don't contact me again. Isabel had left with angry tears and empty threats. But she left. And something about seeing Dylan defend her so fiercely had melted more of Mila's carefully constructed defenses. Now, as the rented SUV navigated winding roads flanked by lush tropical vegetation, Mila found herself curious. Where are we going? Dylan shot her a sidelong glance, a small smile, that rare smile that transformed his face, curving his lips. It's a surprise, but I promise it'll be worth it. They drove for about 20 minutes, leaving the developed tourist areas behind and entering the island's wilder heart. The road narrowed, asphalt giving way to packed gravel, and then Dylan turned onto a path almost hidden, marked only by a small carved wooden sign. Makai Art Studio, private. The path wound through a grove of eucalyptus trees that perfumed the air with their minty medicinal scent. Rays of sunlight filtered through the leaves, creating golden lace patterns on the forest floor. The sound of tropical birds, the melodious song of the amakihi and the harsh call of the io hawk, filled the silence. Finally, the forest opened to reveal a small clearing where a structure of wood and glass nestled as if it had grown organically from the ground. It wasn't large, maybe the size of a one-bedroom studio, but it was absolutely perfect. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls offered panoramic views of the distant ocean, sparkling like sapphire under the afternoon sun, while the sloped ceiling in light wood created a sense of coziness without claustrophobia. Mila stepped out of the car slowly, her eyes wide with wonder. "Dylan, what is this place?" It belonged to a local artist who retired to the mainland a few months ago. He wanted someone who would appreciate his space, not just a tourist looking for a vacation home. Dylan came up behind her, his hands landing gently on her shoulders. "I called him yesterday. He agreed to let us use it for today. I thought you deserved a place to paint, a real place. Your place." Emotion closed Mila's throat. She turned to look at him, and what she saw in his eyes, nervous hope, a desire to please her, genuine vulnerability, made her heart do a painful flip. "You did this for me? I'd do anything for you." The words were simple, but the intensity with which they were said loaded them with weight. "I'm trying to prove I'm serious, Mila, that this isn't a game, that you matter." Tears stung her eyes, those damn tears that seemed always near the surface these past few days. But they were different now. Not tears of anger or sadness, but of something more frightening. "Hope, show me inside," she whispered. The studio was a dream come true. Natural light poured through the windows, that perfect golden late afternoon light every artist craved. A professional easel was positioned to capture the ocean view. Shelves lined one wall, stocked with paints, brushes, solvents, all professional quality. There was even a small seating area with a worn sofa covered in soft cotton fabric and a low table holding a pitcher of fresh water and glasses. "The owner left some of his supplies," Dylan explained. "Said you could use whatever you wanted." Mila walked through the space reverently, her fingers grazing surfaces, absorbing the creative energy that still pulsed in the walls. This was a place where art had been made, where someone had poured their soul onto canvases and found something close to peace. "It's perfect," she whispered. Then, turning to Dylan with sudden determination in her eyes, "Stay." "What?" "Stay. Sit on the couch. Let me paint you." The words came out in a rush, as if she were afraid of losing courage if she stopped to think. "You gave me back my art. Let me see you. Really see you." Something crossed Dylan's face, surprise, fear, and then a soft acceptance that reminded her he was being as vulnerable as she was in this. "Okay," he said simply, and settled onto the couch. Mila worked quickly, preparing her palette with hands that trembled slightly with anticipation. She chose a medium-sized canvas and positioned it on the easel, stepping back to study Dylan. He sat in a relaxed but not careless posture, one elbow resting on the sofa arm, hand loose, legs stretched and crossed at the ankles. He'd removed his shoes earlier, and something about seeing him barefoot, unguarded, made Mila's heart squeeze. The afternoon light painted half his face in warm gold, the other half in soft shadow, creating a dramatic contrast she ached to capture. "Just be yourself," she instructed. "Don't pose, just exist." And then she began to paint. The first strokes were exploratory, sketching the basic structure of his face, the line of his shoulders, the way the light fell. But gradually, as she dove deeper into the process, something more emerged. She wasn't just painting what she saw on the surface. She was painting what she felt when she looked at him. The hard lines of his jaw softened by touches of warm grey, suggesting strength tempered by gentleness. His eyes, those stormy grey eyes that haunted her, painted with layers of deep blue and silver, capturing both the sadness and hope she saw in them. His mouth, which she now knew the taste of, rendered in dark reds and soft pinks, hinting at both the severity and tenderness it was capable of. Hours passed. The light changed, the sun dipping lower, transforming the sky into a symphony of oranges and pinks and purples that competed with any palette she could mix. Dylan didn't move, just watched her with an intensity she could feel even when focused on the canvas. "Can I speak?" he asked eventually, his voice low so as not to break her concentration. "Yes, you're extraordinary when you paint. Did you know that?" There was admiration in his voice, genuine reverence. "Your whole body changes. You become free, like all the things that trap you just disappear." Mila paused, looking at him over the canvas. "It's the only time I feel like myself. When I'm painting, I'm not Richard Harrington's daughter or Dylan Whitmore's wife. I'm just Mila. I like just Mila." His eyes held hers. intense and sincere. In fact, I think I'm falling in love with just Mila. The brush almost fell from her hand. What did you say? Dylan rose from the couch, crossing the distance between them in slow, deliberate steps. He stopped just behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body, but not touching. Yet. I said I'm falling in love with you, he repeated, his voice raw and honest. Maybe I've already fallen, I don't know, I've never felt this before, so I have nothing to compare it to. But I know I think about you constantly, that I wake up looking for you. That when you smile, those rare, real smiles, I feel like I've won something precious. Mila turned to face him, the brush still in her paint-stained hand, her heart pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. Dylan, you don't have to say it back, he quickly added, vulnerability crossing his features. I'm not saying this to pressure you or because I expect something. I'm saying it because it's true, and because you deserve to know that someone sees you, really sees you, and chooses you anyway. The tears came. She couldn't stop them this time. They rolled down her cheeks in silent trails as she looked at this man who had entered her life like a sentence and was slowly becoming her salvation. Can I see the painting? Dylan asked softly. She nodded, unable to trust her voice, and stepped aside. Dylan walked around the easel, and she watched his face as he saw the portrait for the first time. His eyes widened, his breath caught, and then, to her absolute shock, she saw tears shimmer in his eyes. Christ, Mila, he whispered, his voice broken, is this how you see me? She'd painted more than a man. She'd painted a soul, wounded but hopeful, lonely but reaching out, trapped but longing for freedom. She'd captured everything he hid so carefully, the pain of losing his mother, the weight of impossible expectations, the fear of never being enough. But she'd also painted his strength, his hidden gentleness, the way he tried so desperately to do the right thing even when he didn't know what right was. Yes, she answered simply. That's how I see you. Dylan turned to look at her, and what she saw in his eyes stole whatever breath she had left. Raw desire, need, love. You see me better than I see myself, he said, his voice rough. You see me as who I want to be. He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands framing her face with a tenderness that made her tremble. His thumb traced her lower lip, staining it lightly with the paint still on her skin. Mila, he whispered her name like a prayer. Can I kiss you? Can I touch you? Because if I can't soon, I think I'll die. In response, she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss started soft, exploratory, almost shy. But it quickly deepened, years of loneliness and pent-up desire pouring between them. Dylan's tongue sought entrance, and she granted it, savoring the taste of him, coffee and something darker, more addictive. His hands moved from her face to her hair, his fingers burying in the chestnut strands and tilting her head to give him better access. She moaned against his mouth, her own hands exploring the planes of his chest, feeling the muscles contract beneath her touch. You're killing me, Dylan murmured against her lips, his breathing coming in ragged gasps. Absolutely killing me. Then don't stop, she whispered back, her words echoing what she'd said that night on the beach. Dylan's hands slid down her back, pulling her closer until there was no space between their bodies. She could feel the hard evidence of his desire pressing against her hip, and liquid heat melted through her core in response. They pulled apart just enough to breathe, foreheads pressed together, hearts beating in frantic synchrony. I don't want to rush you, Dylan said, though every line of his body contradicted the words. But God, Mila, I want you. I want you in every way one person can want another. Mila looked into those stormy grey eyes, seeing her own desire reflected there, and made a decision. This wouldn't be how it was supposed to have been. Planned, orchestrated, part of the contract. This would be choice, hers, theirs. Then have me, she whispered. Tonight. Not as an obligation, not because someone expects it, but because we choose it. Something broke in Dylan, the last wall of restraint. He kissed her again, deeper, more urgent, and when they finally pulled apart, they both knew they'd crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The night promised to transform everything. The beachfront villa Dylan had reserved for that night was secluded, hidden among whispering palm trees and tropical vegetation that created a cocoon of absolute privacy. It wasn't part of the main resort. It was something private, exclusive, accessible only by a stone path lit by paper lanterns that swayed gently with the night breeze. The structure was modernized traditional Hawaiian, polished koa wood, and retractable glass walls that allowed the ocean to literally enter the space. The sound of the waves was constant, rhythmic like a beating heart. Scented candles, plumeria and vanilla, were strategically placed, creating a soft, golden light that made everything ethereal, almost magical. In the center of the main room was a king-size bed covered in pristine white linen, surrounded by sheer voile curtains that undulated like ghosts with the sea breeze. Red rose petals were scattered over the sheets, a romantic touch Dylan had arranged, though now it seemed almost shy compared to the raw intensity of what was about to happen. Mila stood near the open doors, looking out at the moonlit ocean. The full moon, that same moon that had witnessed their vulnerable conversation days ago, painted everything in shades of silver and shadow. She wore a simple white cotton dress Dylan hadn't seen before, something she must have bought at the resort boutique. The fabric was light, almost transparent under the moonlight, hinting at the curves of her body without fully revealing them. Dylan approached from behind, his barefoot steps silent on the polished wood. He'd removed his linen shirt at some point on the way there, wearing only pants that hung low on his hips. Mila could see him reflected in the glass, all muscle and shadow, raw masculinity tempered by something softer in his eyes. "You're nervous," he said quietly. Not a question, but an observation. Yes. There was no point in lying. Her heart was beating so loud she was certain he could hear it. Dylan stopped just behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body, but still not touching. "We can stop at any time, we can just sleep. There's no pressure, Mila. There will never be pressure." She turned to face him, and what she saw in his eyes, infinite patience mixed with barely contained desire, melted her last reserves. "I don't want to stop. I want this. I want you. Are you sure?" In response, Mila raised her hands and placed them on his chest, feeling the warmth of his skin, the strong beating of his heart beneath her palms. Slowly, deliberately, she slid her hands upward, over his defined chest, across his broad shoulders, until finally intertwining behind his neck. "I'm absolutely sure." Dylan released a trembling sigh as if he'd been holding his breath, and then his hands found her waist. Fingers splayed against the thin fabric of her dress, he gently pulled her closer until their bodies aligned perfectly. Soft against hard, curves against planes. "You're so beautiful," he murmured, his eyes tracing every aspect of her face as if memorizing it. So perfectly, devastatingly beautiful. Then he kissed her. But this kiss was different from the others. It wasn't urgent or desperate. It was slow, deliberate, reverent, as if he had all the time in the world and intended to use every second worshipping her. His mouth moved over hers with skill that took her breath away, alternating between gentle and demanding, tender and possessive. His tongue traced the outline of her lips before diving in to taste deeply, exploring every corner of her mouth until she was dizzy and clinging to him for support. Dylan's hands slid from her waist to her back, finding the zipper of her dress. He paused, his lips leaving hers just enough to whisper, "May I?" "Yes," she gasped. "Please." The zipper descended with a soft sound, and then his hands were on her skin, rough calluses from working with vines contrasting deliciously with his gentle touch. He traced the curve of her spine with his fingers, making her arch against him involuntarily, a low moan escaping her throat. "I love that sound," Dylan murmured against her neck, his lips trailing a path of fire down her throat. "I want to hear every sound you can make." He eased the dress from her shoulders, and the fabric fell in a whisper of cotton at her feet. Dylan stepped back just enough to look at her, and the expression on his face, pure adoration and raw desire, made her cheeks flush with heat. "Perfect," he said reverently. "You're absolutely perfect." His hands explored with reverence, each touch a discovery, each caress a promise. Mila felt adored, precious, as if she were the most valuable thing he'd ever held. Dylan gently guided her to the bed, brushing aside the rose petals, and laid her carefully against the white sheets. She must have looked like an offering, hair spread around her like a dark halo, skin flushed and glowing in the candlelight, breathing quick with anticipation. Dylan stood for a moment, just looking at her with such intensity that she felt both worshipped and desired. Then his hands went to the button of his pants. Myla propped herself on her elbows, watching as he undressed. And when he finally stood before her, vulnerable and completely present, she saw not just a body but a soul offering itself. "You're magnificent," she whispered. He joined her on the bed, his body covering hers, and the weight of him, the sensation of being enveloped, protected, desired, was intoxicating. They kissed deeply while their hands explored, learning each other's contours, finding sensitive spots that made the other sigh with pleasure. Dylan explored her body with reverence, his hands and lips discovering every place that made her tremble. He dedicated time to each discovery, attentive to every reaction, building pleasure like an artist building a masterpiece, layer upon layer, color upon color. When he finally prepared to join with her completely, he paused, his eyes meeting hers. "I love you," he said, the words raw and honest. "I need you to know that. Before we cross this, I need you to know." Tears stung her eyes. "I love you too. I don't know when it happened, but it did. I love you, Dylan." And then they became one, slow, gentle, perfect. There was a moment of adjustment, of bodies learning to fit together, and then movement, a rhythm as ancient as the ocean breathing beyond the glass walls. Dylan moved with her, not over her, their bodies finding a dance that was uniquely theirs. Every movement was deliberate, every touch loaded with meaning. He watched her face, adjusting, learning, ensuring that every moment was about shared pleasure, about connection, about love. "So perfect," Dylan gasped, his words punctuated by kisses. "You complete me in a way I never thought possible." Pleasure built like waves, starting gentle, then growing, each one larger than the last, until it finally broke over them both in a cascade of sensations that left them trembling and holding each other, as if they were the only solid thing in a world that had dissolved into pure feeling. Myla cried out his name as release rushed through her, her body pulsing with pleasure so intense it brought tears to her eyes. Dylan followed moments later, a deep, guttural sound tearing from his throat as he found his own culmination, his body shuddering with the force of his release. They remained entwined for long moments after, hearts beating wildly, breathing slowly, returning to normal. Dylan was still inside her, reluctant to withdraw, and Myla was in no hurry to let him go. Eventually he rolled to his side, pulling her with him so she was nestled against his chest. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her back, circles and waves, and what she realized might be letters, spelling words without sound. "I love you," he whispered in the dark, his words vibrating against her hair. "I love you, Myla Whitmore." And for the first time in her life, hearing that surname, Whitmore, didn't feel like a prison. It felt like home. The flight back to New York was drastically different from the flight there. Where before there had been tense silence and careful distance, now there were hands intertwined over the center console, stolen kisses when the flight attendant wasn't looking, and whispered conversations about the future that no longer seemed terrifying but full of possibility. Myla rested her head on Dylan's shoulder, her fingers tracing absent patterns on his palm as she watched the clouds pass by the window. They'd spent the last 48 hours in Hawaii locked in their own bubble, making love, talking until dawn, painting and wine tasting, building something new and fragile and precious. But now, as the plane cut through the sky toward reality, they could both feel the weight of what awaited them. Families who wouldn't understand, expectations that wouldn't disappear simply because feelings had changed, a marriage contract that still bound them for reasons that had nothing to do with love. "They won't accept this easily," Myla said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. Dylan squeezed her fingers. "I know. My father will claim feelings are irrelevant to business. My grandmother will cite tradition and family obligation. And your father, my father will say I'm finally fulfilling my purpose." The bitterness in her voice was palpable. "He'll see this as validation of his methods, that forcing me into this marriage was the right thing because it worked." "But it didn't work because of them," Dylan said fiercely, turning to face her. "It worked in spite of them. It worked because we refused to be just pieces in their games, because we chose each other." Myla smiled, a small, sad smile. You think they care about that distinction? No, but I care, and you care, and that's what matters. JFK Airport was chaos, announcements echoing, luggage clattering, people rushing in all directions with New York's perpetual urgency. The air was cold, a shocking change from the tropical warmth they'd left behind, and Mila pulled her coat tighter around herself as Dylan handled their luggage. A driver waited for them, holding a sign that read Whitmore, and drove them through Manhattan's dense traffic toward Dylan's penthouse apartment, now technically theirs, on the Upper East Side. The building was everything Mila expected: elegant doorman, marble lobby, private elevator that required a key to access the top floor. The apartment was spectacular. Dark wood floors, floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Central Park, modern art on the walls that probably cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. But it felt cold, sterile, like an expensive showroom instead of a home. "We can change everything," Dylan said quickly, noticing her expression. "Redecorate, bring your paintings, make it ours, not just mine." Before Mila could respond, Dylan's phone rang. He looked at the screen and his face darkened. "It's my father. He probably heard we're back." "Answer it," Mila said softly. "You can't put this off forever." Dylan took a deep breath and answered, "Father." Even from across the room, Mila could hear the raised voice, not shouting, but with that kind of cold, controlled anger that was somehow worse. Dylan listened mostly, his jaw progressively tightening, his free fingers clenching into a fist. "No, that's not what happened. Father, listen. This isn't just a business arrangement anymore, because I fell in love with her." The last words burst out loud and definitive. "Yes, you heard right. I love her, and I'm not going to treat her like a corporate asset or a convenient merger." Silence. Then Dylan listened for another minute before his expression turned stony. "If that's your position, then we need to talk in person. Today." "No. Not at the winery. At the Whitmore office. In 2 hours." He hung up without saying goodbye and stood for a moment, staring at the phone as if it might bite him. "Dylan," Mila approached, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "He wants me to annul the marriage." His voice was hollow, shocked. "Said if I allowed feelings to complicate the arrangement, then the marriage's purpose has been compromised. That it would be cleaner to end it now, before we became too attached." Anger flared in Mila's chest, hot and righteous and protective. "He can't do that. We're married, legally married. He can make our lives hell, can cut off my access to company funds, can use his influence to make sure my grandmother takes away my shares." Dylan ran his hand through his hair, that familiar gesture of frustration. "Christ, this is a nightmare." "Then we fight," Mila said fiercely. "We fight for us, Dylan. You said you chose me. Prove it." Something in her words, the challenge, the belief in him, ignited something in his eyes. He pulled her against him, holding her tight. "You're right, I'll fight, we'll fight." 2 hours later, they sat in an elegant conference room on the 40th floor of the Whitmore building in the financial district. Windows offered dizzying views of lower Manhattan, One World Trade Center, rising like a sentinel in the distance. The table was polished mahogany, surrounded by black leather chairs that probably cost more than cars. Dylan's father, James Whitmore, sat at the head of the table like a king on his throne. At 62, he was what Dylan would probably look like in 30 years. Silver hair, impeccable posture, eyes that evaluated everything in terms of financial value. Beside him sat Dylan's grandmother, Eleanor Whitmore, a thin woman of 78 with eyes sharp as ice and a spine so straight it seemed forged from steel. Dylan, Mila. James nodded to them with cold courtesy. "Sit." They sat on the opposite side of the table, Dylan keeping his hand firmly on Mila's, a silent declaration of solidarity. "I'll get straight to the point," James began. "This marriage was arranged for specific purposes, consolidating the Harrington family investment, presenting a united front to our competitors, and securing company succession. It wasn't meant to be a love story." "What if I don't care what it was meant to be?" Dylan challenged. "What if I want it to be both, an advantageous marriage and a real marriage?" "Feelings complicate things," Eleanor spoke for the first time, her voice like breaking glass. I warned you, Dylan. Warned you to do this clinically. Maintain appropriate distance. But you've always been weak like your grandfather, letting the heart lead the head. Grandmother. Your grandfather nearly destroyed this company with his passion for wine, she continued relentlessly. Refused to expand, refused to modernize because he was too busy nurturing each vine like a child. It took your father years to undo that damage. That damage was what made our wine special. Dylan slammed his hand on the table, making Mila jump. Grandfather built a reputation for quality that you turned into just another corporate brand. A corporate brand worth billions, James said coldly. A brand that provides jobs for hundreds of people. A brand you'll inherit if you prove you can separate personal feelings from business decisions. So that's it? Dylan stood, pulling Mila with him. Either I give her up, or you disinherit me. Eleanor and James exchanged glances. Finally, Eleanor spoke. Don't be dramatic, Dylan. No one said anything about disinheriting. But if you insist on treating this marriage as a romance instead of a strategic arrangement, you'll need to prove you can keep them separate. The company comes first. Always. What if I say she comes first? The words came out before Dylan could stop them. What if I say I choose Mila over the entire empire? The silence that followed was absolute. James slowly stood, his eyes, so similar to Dylan's but completely empty of warmth, fixed on his son. Then you're more foolish than I thought. You'd throw away generations of legacy for a girl you've known less than 2 weeks? She's not a girl, Dylan said through clenched teeth. She's my wife. And yes, I choose her. Every day. Without hesitation. Mila felt tears sting her eyes at his words, but forced them down. This wasn't the moment for weakness. Very well. James collected his papers with precise movements. Then you'll manage without access to family trust funds until you prove you can balance both commitments. Consider this a trial period. That's ridiculous. Those are my terms. James's voice allowed no discussion. Prove this marriage won't compromise your business judgment, and we'll discuss restoring your privileges. Until then, you'll live on your CEO salary and nothing more. They left the building in stunned silence. On the sidewalk, with New York's cold wind cutting through their coats, Dylan finally spoke. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for dragging you into this. Mila turned to face him, framing his face with her hands. Don't apologize for fighting for us. Don't apologize for choosing me. But they're going to make this difficult. Then let them make it difficult. Her eyes blazed with fierce determination. Dylan, I spent my entire life being controlled by my father. I'm not going to let your family do the same to us. If they want a fight, we'll give them a fight. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. That night, lying together in the king-size bed in the cold apartment that was slowly beginning to feel like home, Dylan held Mila as if she were his lifeline. Thank you, he whispered in the dark. For what? For making me want to be brave. For making me want more than just the empire. For making me remember there's more to life than legacies and bottom lines. Mila turned in his arms, pressing a soft kiss to his lips. We'll get through this. Together. And for the first time since they'd entered that office, Dylan smiled. Together. But they both knew the battle was only beginning. And the most difficult person Mila would have to face still waited. Her own father. 3 years later, California sunlight poured through the French windows of Mila's studio, bathing everything in golden light that made the colors on her canvases even more vibrant. The scent of fresh paint mingled with the fragrance of lavender growing in terracotta pots lined along the outdoor terrace, and in the distance she could hear the soft sound of conversation and laughter coming from the vineyards. Mila stood before her latest painting, a large canvas that captured the essence of everything her life had become. No longer the dark, imprisoned colors of her earlier work, but an explosion of light and movement that seemed to pulse with its own life. Deep blues of the ocean, lush greens of the vines, warm golds of the California sun, and woven through it all, threads of red and gray intertwined. She and Dylan, forever connected. 3 years. It seemed like both an eternity and the blink of an eye. After that devastating meeting with the Whitmore family, things had gotten worse before they got better. Mila's father, Richard Harrington, was furious when he discovered she and Dylan were complicating a perfectly good arrangement with unnecessary feelings. He threatened to withdraw his investment, use his influence to destroy Dylan's reputation in business circles, even contest the validity of the marriage. But something had changed in Mila. Hawaii hadn't just awakened her love for Dylan, it had awakened her courage. For the first time in her life, she stood before her father and said, "No, I won't let you control my life anymore," she said that day, her voice trembling but firm as Dylan stood beside her like a solid rock. "I don't care about your money. I don't care about your approval. I care about the man I love and the life we're building together." Richard had tried to argue, threaten, manipulate, all the tactics that had worked for 25 years, but this time they bounced off a wall Mila had finally built, not to lock herself in, but to protect herself. Dylan had also made his own declaration. In an extraordinary board meeting, he proposed something radical: sell his majority stake in Whitmore Vineyards to a consortium of investors who respected both tradition and innovation, keeping only a small stake and the right to manage a boutique winery he would build from scratch. "You turned something my grandfather loved into a corporate machine," he told his family, his voice calm but unequivocal. "I'm going to bring back what we lost, the soul, the passion, the art of making wine, not just selling it." Eleanor had been shocked, James furious. But in the end, the numbers spoke louder. The offer was too generous to refuse, and Dylan had the legal right to sell. The deal closed in 6 months. With the money from the sale, Dylan bought 50 acres of prime land in Napa Valley. Not the overpriced touristy parts, but a more rustic, authentic area where the land still whispered ancient secrets. He built a boutique winery the way his grandfather would have approved. Small, focused on artisanal quality, every bottle treated like a work of art. They called it Whitmore and Harrington Estate, not out of family obligation, but as a declaration that they were creating something new, something theirs. Mila established her studio on the property, a luminous space overlooking the rolling vines that changed color with the seasons. She painted every day now, not hidden in locked rooms but openly, proudly. Her work began gaining recognition, first in local galleries, then in larger exhibitions in San Francisco and Los Angeles. Critics called her a raw and honest voice that captures the complexity of human experience. But recognition wasn't what mattered. What mattered was freedom, to create without fear, to love without restrictions, to live authentically. "Mila?" Dylan's voice, warm and familiar, pulled her from her thoughts. She turned to find her husband standing in the studio doorway, and as always, the sight of him made her heart do that little flip. He wore faded jeans stained with soil and a flannel workshirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing sun-bronzed forearms. His hair was slightly mussed, a few grey strands appearing at the temples, marks of the life they'd built together. But it was his eyes, those stormy grey eyes that still took her breath away, that sparkled with something she couldn't decipher. Excitement? Nervousness? "There's someone here to see you," he said, then stepped aside to reveal a figure behind him. Eleanor Whitmore. Dylan's grandmother stood there, leaning on an elegant cane she hadn't had the last time Mila saw her. 3 years had been kind to her in some ways. She still maintained that regal posture, but harsh in others. There were more wrinkles around her eyes, more fragility in her frame. "Mrs. Whitmore," Mila said cautiously, wiping her paint-stained hands on a cloth. "This is a surprise. May I come in?" Eleanor's voice was less cutting than Mila remembered, almost hesitant. Mila looked at Dylan, who nodded encouragingly. Of course. Eleanor entered slowly, her eyes traveling over the studio, the canvases covering every available surface, the smell of paint and turpentine, the spectacular view of the vines through the windows. Finally, her gaze landed on the large painting Mila had just finished. For a long moment she simply stared. Then, to Mila's absolute shock, tears began sliding down the older woman's impeccably made-up cheeks. This reminds me of him," Eleanor whispered. "My husband, Dylan's grandfather. The way he saw the world, full of colors and possibilities and passion I never understood." She turned to Mila, and for the first time, there was something human in her eyes, something broken and regretful. "I came to apologize," Eleanor said, the words clearly costing her. For 3 years I've watched from afar as you two built something beautiful, as Dylan rediscovered his love for wine that my husband tried to teach him. As you blossomed from a frightened girl into a confident, talented woman. She paused, wiping tears with a lace handkerchief. And I realized I made the same mistake with you that I made with my husband. I valued legacy over happiness, control over connection. Grandmother. Dylan approached, but Eleanor raised her hand. Let me finish. Please. She took a deep breath. When my husband died, he left a letter. I never showed it to you, Dylan. It was too painful, too accusatory. Her voice broke. He wrote that I had loved him to death, not with affection but with expectations, that I'd turned something beautiful into obligation, and that he hoped one day I'd understand what I'd lost. She looked between Myla and Dylan, her eyes pleading for understanding. I finally understand, and I don't want to die with you hating me, Dylan. I don't want to leave this world without trying to fix what I broke. Dylan was silent for a moment, processing. Then he crossed the distance and gently embraced his grandmother, something Mila had never seen him do. I don't hate you, grandmother, he said softly. I never did. I just wished you understood. Now I do. Too late. But I understand. That evening, after Eleanor left with promises to visit more often and meet any great-grandchildren who might come, Myla and Dylan sat on their private terrace, watching the sun set over the vines. The golden light transformed everything into shades of amber and honey, and the air was perfumed with ripe grapes ready for harvest. Dylan pulled Myla onto his lap, his arms wrapping around her protectively. She nestled against him, her head fitting perfectly under his chin as it always did. Do you believe her? Mila asked softly. I do. For the first time, I think she really sees what she lost. He paused, then added, and speaking of great-grandchildren. Myla sat up to look at him, and something in his expression, nervousness mixed with barely contained joy, made her heart race. Dylan? What? I saw the pregnancy test in the bathroom this morning. The world seemed to stop. Myla had taken the test in the early dawn, too early to wake him, planning to wait for the right moment to tell him. Tears immediately filled her eyes. I was going to tell you tonight. I was waiting for the perfect moment. This is the perfect moment. Dylan kissed her deeply, his fingers threading through her hair. When they pulled apart, both had tears on their faces. A baby. Our baby. Made from love, not contracts or obligations. Are you happy? Myla whispered, suddenly vulnerable. Happy? Dylan laughed, a sound of pure joy. Mila, I've never been happier in my life. You've given me everything. Love, purpose, freedom. And now a child. He placed his hand gently on her still flat abdomen. This baby will grow up knowing they're loved. Will grow up seeing their parents choose each other every day. Will grow up free. 6 months later, on a sunny spring morning when the vines were exploding with new growth and the air smelled of promise, Sophia Eleanor Whitmore was born. She had Dylan's eyes, that stormy grey, but Myla's dark hair and a cry that promised a strong personality. When the nurses placed her in Mila's arms for the first time, something inside her completed, a piece she hadn't even known was missing until that moment. Dylan stood beside the bed, unable to stop touching. Sophia's tiny fist, her delicate cheeks, her soft hair. Tears rolled unashamedly down his face. She's perfect, he whispered in awe. You're perfect. Our family is perfect. Eleanor visited at the hospital, holding her great-granddaughter with a tenderness Mila never thought possible from the rigid woman. Welcome to the world, little Sophia, the older woman whispered. You have extraordinary parents. Never forget that. Even Richard Harrington showed up, uncomfortable and stiff but present. He didn't apologize for his years of control. Perhaps he never would. But when he held Sophia, something in his expression softened. She looks like you as a baby, he told Mila. And for a moment, just a moment, she saw the father he could have been if he'd chosen differently. 2 years later, the gallery in Soho was packed. Art collectors, critics, curious onlookers, and friends who'd come to support. It was Mila's first major solo exhibition in New York, appropriately titled Freedom in Colors. The paintings told a story, her story, starting with dark, claustrophobic works from her years under her father's control, moving through the conflicted hues of her arranged marriage, exploding into the vibrant colors of Hawaii, where everything changed, and finally arriving at the most recent pieces, radiant with light and love and new life. The centerpiece of the exhibition was a large-scale portrait, Dylan holding baby Sophia, the vines stretching behind them, the setting sun making everything golden. But it wasn't photorealistic. It was emotional, impressionistic, capturing not just how they looked but how they made her feel. The painting's title, The Home, it already had a red sticker, sold, to Eleanor Whitmore, who'd insisted on buying it to remember what really matters. Dylan stood beside Mila, Sophia in his arms, wearing a tiny red dress that matched the dress her mother had worn at the luau 5 years ago. The toddler pointed at the paintings with chubby fingers, babbling commentary in her own baby language. "Mama paints," she declared proudly to anyone who'd listen. "Yes, Mama paints," Dylan agreed, kissing the top of her head before looking at Mila with that look, the one that still made her melt even after 5 years. "And she's extraordinary at it." A critic from the Times was having a serious conversation with the gallery curator, and Mila caught fragments. Most authentic voice of her generation. Transformation captured in paint. Brilliant future. But the praise that mattered most came from Sophia, who pointed at the home painting and said with absolute conviction, "Daddy, me, pretty." That night, after all the photos had been taken and all the critics had left, the three of them returned to their hotel. Dylan laid Sophia in her travel crib, softly singing a lullaby his grandfather used to sing to him. The child fought sleep until she couldn't anymore, finally succumbing with a soft sigh. Mila and Dylan stood side by side at the crib, watching their daughter sleep. Her rosy cheeks, dark lashes resting against her skin, the slight smile on her lips as she dreamed. "Do you remember that night on the terrace in Hawaii?" Dylan whispered, his arm around Mila's waist. "When you said we were prisoners and our own jailers? I remember. Do you think we managed to set ourselves free?" Mila looked from her daughter's peaceful face to the man who'd once been a stranger at the altar and back to the life they'd built, imperfect and chaotic and absolutely theirs. "I think we did," she whispered. "I think we're finally free." Dylan pulled her into a kiss, soft and sweet, and full of promises of more kisses to come. When they pulled apart, he pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you, Mila Whitmore. I'll love you when we're old and grey and our great-grandchildren are running through our vineyards. I'll love you every day between now and then, and I'll love you beyond that." "I love you too," she whispered back. "Forever." And as they stood there in the semi-darkness, watching their daughter sleep and listening to the sounds of the city through the window, Mila reflected on the impossible journey that had brought them here. An arranged marriage that should have been a prison, a stolen kiss that changed everything, a love that refused to be contained by contracts or expectations, and finally, painfully, wonderfully, freedom. "I never imagined a stolen kiss could change everything," Mila thought, echoing words that now seemed prophetic. But it did. And she wouldn't trade a single moment, not the tears, not the struggles, not the fear, because every one of those moments had led her here, to home, to love, to freedom, to Dylan, forever. Sometimes love is born where we least expect it, at cold altars, beneath veils of resentment, between contracts signed by hands other than our own. Mila and Dylan entered that marriage as prisoners, chained by expectations and legacies they never asked for, but they chose something revolutionary, to free themselves together. It wasn't the stolen kiss that changed everything. It was the courage to recognize they deserved more than lives lived for others. That freedom isn't the absence of commitment, but the presence of choice. In the end, they didn't just find love, they found themselves. And perhaps that's the greatest story of all, that of two souls who refused to remain imprisoned and in freeing themselves discovered they were worth fighting for. Have you ever asked yourself what invisible prisons you've built around yourself, and who might be the key to setting you free? If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and become a member to get early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt it was really worth listening to, also click the Super Thanks button. Your gesture makes all the difference and helps us continue bringing stories that move you.